Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show, the podcast. Today is a little bit of a follow-up from yesterday's 10-minute mailbag. Don't worry if you are just in the audio-only crowd. This is not like the MCU. You do not have to make sure you watch or listen to everything sequentially to understand what happens next. Today's episode of the podcast is pretty self-explanatory. SDS has an enormous legend problem. A large one. A problem so large you could say it's lacking. In yesterday's 10-minute mailbag, we touched on that just for a tick, in reference to the Team Affinity drop. How the action figure series is super cool, but all of the legends are pretty boring, because most of them we all could have predicted, and they've been in the game for a little bit. So today I'm going to provide 90, yes, that's right, 90, 3 per team legends. It would be cool, if SDS went and got and they targeted. Let's address a couple obvious things. Number one, I know they can't get 90 legends. That is literally impossible. They don't have the budget. So, I know. Secondly, I did not include players who are not going to be in the game, ever. Barry Bonds, for example. Josh Hamilton. Pete Rose. People who did some not-so-nice things that SDS probably does not want to associate with based on previous track records. And that's not Barry Bonds. Barry Bonds is steroids, and Barry Bonds is his likeness thing that he owns and this and that. But the other two people, they did some not-so-great stuff. So, we're avoiding those players just because I don't think SDS is going to do that. And lastly, I certainly missed people, or at the very least, just chose others. That doesn't mean I don't think your player can also be in the game. So if I missed anybody that you think should fit on your favorite team, make sure you put it in the comments. This is just a fun discussion to see how many players are out there. Lots. Thousands. That SDS could go get. Not all of them are going to move the needle, but I feel like the more depth pieces you add, the better your roster becomes, just generally speaking. So I wouldn't mind if SDS got some one-hit wonders and threw them in there. So that's where I'm at. Let's find the button. Let's go do this thing. By the way, because there's really nothing for you to look at gameplay-wise, I'm just going to be grinding the Shark Conquest map while we're having this conversation. Okay, thank you. If you're just on the audio crowd and you'd like to come watch me beat the CPU senseless, you can come do that. kdjTV on YouTube. So we're going to start with the Arizona Diamondbacks. These are alphabetical by city. We're going to start with Byung-Hyun Kim. Why? We need relievers. Bad. Stinky bad. And he is a sidewinding / submarining, more so submarining, closing pitcher. He'd be cool to have. As would Dan Harron. Dan Harron, remember him? Never missed a start with the Diamondbacks from 2008 to 2010. Also fits some theme teams. Cool right-handed pitcher. I think he'd be sweet to have. Also fun to have, Matt Williams. Matt Williams, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Internet, did we have him before? I really think we did. Matt Williams is a third baseman, Giants and Diamondbacks, and fierce power hitter. So he'd be cool. I'd like him. We're moving to the Atlanta Braves, and for a lot of these, I tried to, generationally choose players so they could represent a lot of different time periods. But for a lot of teams, the Braves, or for some teams, the Braves, the Yankees, they've got every human being under the sun. But for the Braves, I think Andrew Jones has got to come back, and I know there's some controversy around Andrew Jones, but Andrew Jones is just one of the best center fielders of all time. Also someone who I missed the ball. I think was in the game before, if I recall correctly, Dale Murphy. Every Braves fan, when I ask who they want in the game, Dale Murphy, top of mind. So Dale Murphy. And then Javi Lopez, man, it's always nice to have fun new catchers, power-hitting ones at that. And Dale Murphy would be electric. I just fulfilled a goal with Tony Clark, so that's good. Javi Lopez also played on the Orioles at the end of his career. Just a fun catcher. Speaking of the Orioles, here comes the first name you've never heard of. You're ready for this one? George Sisler. S-I-S-L-E-R. Look him up. He held the MLB single-season hits record until Ichiro came around and broke it. He played mostly in the 1920s. So if MLB The Show is first a video game and secondly an MLB history lesson, Think about it. George Sisler would make sense. As would Boog Powell. Why should he be in the game? Because he's got one of the coolest friggin' names I've ever heard. He was one of the most dangerous bats in the American League from 1961 to 1974. And that's what the internet told me, because I was not alive to watch him. And then lastly, this one's just all too obvious. Adam Jones. Adam Jones has wanted to be in the game. You can go to his Twitter and see that he's like, hey, bro, why aren't I in the game? Adam Jones would be so much fun. He'd be so much fun, and I really want him badly. Next up, we're moving to the Boston Red Sox. Boston. Manny Ramirez. That's enough. That's enough right there. Just like saying Adam Jones, we all want him. Manny Ramirez, I'm pretty sure we all want Manny Ramirez. I'm pretty positive, because he'd be so much fun to use. And he'd be on so many teams. I hope his swing is good. Next up, I really want Ted Williams back. I miss Ted Williams. He was one of my favorite swings in the game. And I think with the way that they do card builds now, he'd easily be one of the best in the game. With the attributes up to 125 and how much, vision and clutch matter, I think he'd be electric to use in this game. So I want Ted Williams back. And I don't think you're going to catch much of an argument from people. And now this one's maybe a little controversial. I don't know if it's the steroid thing or his personality. But like Roger Clemens would be fun. He's got one of the best splitters of all time. He pitched for a bunch of teams. He's a Red Sox legend. Does he have the most Cy Youngs in history? I think he still does. I would just really like Roger Clemens. I'm hesitant on that one. I was kind of between him and Curt Schilling, but I know Curt Schilling is also not a nice person, so I chose Roger Clemens. But that's where I'm at. For the Cubs, the Chicago Cubs, incoming funny name. I wasn't necessarily thinking of the Incognito series while doing this, but I was like, oh, this guy'd fit the Incognito series. Mordecai Three Finger Brown. His name is freaking Mordecai. Look him up. Learn his story. He was an old-ass pitcher with a cool name in 1904. And one of the best pitchers in Cubs history. So, again, the history lesson aspect of MLB The Show. He might be fun. Who knows? As long as they don't give him a delivery like Warren Spahns, he might be okay. Is this going to fall? Please don't fall. Tony Oliva. Yay. He caught it. Ron Santo. Ron Santo, we had him for what? A season? Or a game cycle? We had him for a minute. And I know he kind of swung a little bit of a wet noodle, but I don't know if they ever truly gave him like a godly card like he should get. So Ron Santo would be nice. And Aramis Ramirez, take your pick from those early 2000s Cubs. Aramis Ramirez, Derek Lee, Carlos Zambrano. A lot of guys. That would be fun. But I'm going with Aramis Ramirez because it's nice to have third base depth. And he was so fun to watch. I also loved using him in MLB Slugfest 2004. I don't know why, but I was always the Cubs when I played that game. Not sure. Moving on. The White Sox. This is another very popular one that you've heard me say a bunch. Maglio Ordonez would fit a Tigers team as well. And I just want more variety in the outfield. I know outfield, you think about it, and it's like, oh, outfield's got a lot of legends. Yeah, but there's a high level of legend, and then there's just the beefy live series guys and nothing else. Like, there's not a lot of depth when you think about it. So I want Maglio Ordonez. I also would like Robin Ventura to play the corners. An underrated player from the 90s. Go back and look at his baseball reference page. You'll be like, oh, wow, this guy played the game. This guy was pretty good. Famous, obviously, for headlocking Nolan Ryan and trying to beat his brain, or backwards, the fight with Nolan Ryan. But Robin Ventura was an underrated baseball player. So he'd be cool. And lastly, let's keep adding catchers. How about Carlton Fisk? Carlton Fisk was also a Red Sox. He was one of the top catchers in the 80s. It doesn't hurt to just get some, even if they're like not the sexiest names of all time, we just need some folks who could help add to team affinity or help add to like headliner drops. Or it's become exacerbated with the seasons and sets model that we get duplicate cards all the time. I hope we don't see that again. But it still doesn't hurt to have more legends. More legends is good all the time. Team diversity will be better. It probably opens up more avenues to unlock cards, if we're being honest. Oh, I didn't want a homer with Manny Minoso, so I wanted a triple. Okay. And that's the White Sox. The White Sox, their history is pretty well represented, I think, in the game, actually. Moving on to the Cincinnati Reds, ironically, who I'm beating the brakes off of 7-0 currently. 8-0 currently. Johnny Damon's incredible. Frank Robinson. He's a baseball legend. He's a Hall of Famer, MVP in both leagues, also an Oriole, legendary manager as well. Frank Robinson makes too much sense to have in this game. I'm kind of surprised that he hasn't been in it, if I'm being perfectly frank. Haha, Frank Robinson, see what I did there? Moving on. Jay Bruce. He's just a fun, recent guy who played for the Reds. A theme team god, a nice swing, a power bat. Jay Bruce would be cool. You know, Brandon Phillips is in there as well, but when I think of, like, recent Reds, it's Joey Votto and it's Jay Bruce. Why? I don't know. And then lastly for the Reds, get ready to Google. His name is Noodles Hahn. That's Noodles, like noodles, and Hahn, H-A-H-N. Noodles Hahn, this is nuts, actually, accumulated 44.5 WAR in 6 seasons between 1899 and 1905. He threw 225 starts, or he pitched 225 games in that span, and he had 209 complete games. That's when pitch counts weren't real, and that's also probably when they were throwing 74 miles an hour. But it's a history lesson, and his name is friggin' Noodles. I want Noodles on. I would use him. Next up to Cleveland, the Cleveland franchise. Travis friggin' Hafner. We had him semi-recently, didn't we? Was it 20? Was it 21? Refresh my memory, internet. But I'd love to have Travis Hafner back. Just a masher. And then I went for a weird one, because I did try to think of relievers when possible. Because you can't add a bunch of legends and then just forget about relievers. You need relievers. So Bob Wickman. Raise your hand if you remember Bob Wickman. His claim to fame was that he had, like, part of his, I think his pointer finger was, like, cut off or something from an accident. And so he had a really interesting, unique release on his sinker, and it just dipped a lot. That's the story I remember hearing. So let's get Bob Wickman. He was also fat and rotund. He was fun. And then the last one is one of the best baseball players of all time, a 1937 Hall of Fame inductee with over 2,000 career hits. Nap, I believe it's pronounced Lajoie, or Lajoie. Or for the common folk, Nap LaJoie. Just more baseball history lessons. He's one of the best players in Cleveland's franchise history. They were called the Cleveland Naps for a little bit in honor of him. Look that up, too. That's history. That's fact. Look that up. But he'd be cool to have. I don't know what type of player he'd be. Probably more of a contact guy, which leads into a larger discussion of the hitting engine would need to be retooled to maximize a lot of the people I'm about to talk about. But I'm in for adding diverse types of players who do different things, so not every single player you use in this game feels the same. That's kind of what it comes down to. We're going to the Rockies next, Colorado. We're going to start with Andres Galarraga. Andres Galarraga played a lot of places. Colorado, I think, was only 5 or 6 seasons. But when we talk about... I'm swinging at everything, by the way, for the YouTube audience who's paying attention. When we talk about pure power hitters, we're talking about, like... power. Andres Galarraga. He'd be so cool. As would Carlos Gonzalez. Cargo, a fan favorite swing. He was in the game semi-recently, but I can't remember if that was when he was still active or not. It must have been just on the tail end of him being active, because he'd be fun to have. As would Troy Tulowitzki. I don't know anybody who'd complain about getting Tulo card. Another shortstop who had just one of the most insane peaks for any shortstop. Played for the Blue Jays and the Yankees as well. Beyond a couple teams. I would love Tulo. And, like, listen, I don't know what rights cost. There are a lot of different ways to, like, attain a player's rights depending on who owns the rights. But I can't imagine Tulo being that expensive, right? Let's go get our boy Tulo. Let's move to the Detroit Tigers. Ty Cobb, he was in the game not long ago. They took him out because his rights were expired or whatever the situation was. Just bring him back. The best players of all time. He was fun to use, too. He really was. So Ty Cobb would be cool. As would, here's a name that a lot of recent baseball fans might not know. Mickey Lolich? I don't know how to say it. Mickey. He's the franchise leader for the Tigers in starts, strikeouts, and shutouts. A big-time pitcher. And here's my recent one that people might not know why it's cool or important. But it is. Carlos Guillen. He was on those good Maglio Ordonez Tigers teams. He was an infielder who, I think he was a switch hitter. He had close to 300 in his Detroit career. He was a shortstop, a first baseman, a third baseman. He might have touched second. A sweet swing. A really sweet swing. We finished the AL Central, yay. So in my opinion, he'd be fun to have. We got to go build a lineup now for the NL Central, so I'm going to do that. Next up, the Houston Astros, because they're butts. Lance Berkman, a switch-hitting god, man. Lance Berkman was so fun to watch in his prime. He had an incredible career. I mean, there might have been a point during his career where you're like, is this guy going to be a Hall of Famer? Because he was that good. He played outfield. He played first. He was a Cardinal. He was a Yankee. Was he somewhere else as well? I don't remember. Either way, very good player. This next one is a one-off. It is a complete rando that you're going to be like, whomst and why? But just roll with me here. I'm going with Richard Hidalgo. You know who Richard Hidalgo is? He had like one outstanding year in his entire life, but my good golly gosh, was it outstanding. A big-time power hitter. Like a big-time power hitter. Who I think it'd be fun, man. Look, they gave us Richie Sexson this year. No disrespect to Richie Sexson, because I for years was like, Richie Sexson would be cool. He was a early 2000s nothing but power hitter. And that's kind of what Richard Hidalgo is. So if Sexton's in the game, it opens the door for Richard Hidalgo. And lastly, as we talk about needing relievers, Brad Lidge would be so popular. Brad Lidge pitched on a handful of teams. I think he would be somebody that a lot of people would try to use. I would love to have Brad Lidge back in the game. Next, we're moving to the Kansas City Royals. And we start with the player everybody's wanted forever. It's Carlos Beltran. Or Carlos Beltran, if you're trying to say it appropriately. I mean, what's taking so long? Let's get Carlos back in this diggity-dang game, man. He would be used by so many people. And maybe that eliminates the whole point of lineup diversity. I understand that. But he would be just... He'd be so fun. He'd have so many different types of cards, too. Early in his career, he had some speed. Later in his career, he'd just be hitting nukes. I would love it. So I want Carlos Beltran. Next up, Willie Wilson. Now, this is one of those players who I talked about. We'd have to reimagine the game's engine a little bit. Willie Wilson, if you guys are wondering why I keep looking over here and down, I'm clearly reading notes here. But Willie Wilson was the Royals, or is the Royals, franchise leader in steals. Fast boy, very fast, who hit 289 over 15 seasons, so he'd be a contact speed type of fella. And that's not currently, like, fantastic in the current setup of the game. But with a little bit of retooling, I think he would be fun. I think he'd be pleasant. And lastly, for the Royals, I've said this guy's name before in a video, probably a couple years ago at this point. But when you talk about needing reliever help, and you talk about needing quirky, fun relievers, Dan Quisenberry comes to mind. You don't know who Dan Quisenberry is? That's quite all right. Look him up. He was a right-handed sidewinder for the Royals who, at his peak, was like the most dominant closer in baseball, or at the very least the American League. And I think the bullpen is always a problem, right? The bullpen could always use some help. And even if we're getting a bunch of sidewinding, quirky guys, I still think it's okay to throw them in the mix because they make it fun. They make it feel different. That's what I want, feel. It's got to feel different. So that would establish that, in my humblest of opinions. Next up, we're moving to the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. I don't know why I said it like that. Chuck Finley. Who the hell's Chuck Finley? He's a lefty starter. And he's the Angels' all-time leader in wins and innings pitched. I don't know if he'd be dominant, but he'd be good enough for me. And we also have John Lackey, another starter. John Lackey pitched for a bunch of teams. He was a very good right-handed pitcher. At his peak, again, we talk a lot about peak here because ultimately the peak is what the cards are going to be based off of. His peak was phenomenal. And he'd be fun to use. That's really what it comes down to. I just want fun fellas. I just want fun fellas. kdjTV 2024. That's my slogan. And then this is a different one. It's certainly a weird one. I understand why people are like, ew, maybe not. You have a lot of 2000s Angels here who are on good teams who would fit. But I think Darren Erstad would be fun because Darren Erstad would be different. Darren Erstad would fit the hopefully new contact meta that I'm trying to establish in MLB The Show. He had like an over 300 lifetime batting average. He had seasons where he hit like 340. Dude was a menace. So let's take him. We're moving on to the Dodgers. We're probably about halfway through our journey here. Maybe a little less. The Dodgers, Roy Campanella, legendary catcher. Legendary catcher. And like, why not Roy? Go get Roy Campanella. Also, Sandy Koufax, legendary lefty. Here's the thing with the Dodgers. We have so many Dodgers legends. I had to go with the obvious ones, right? So let's get Sandy Koufax, let's get Roy Campanella, and let's bring back Matt Kemp. Where is my boy? Matt Kemp would be so good. Matt Kemp was in the game when I was not good at the game yet. Now that I'm good at the game, whew, bring me Matt Kemp. Moving on to the Marlins. Rest in peace to Jose Fernandez, who I think everyone would be excited about if he was in the game, how we could honor his legacy of just being a fun, exciting Marlins pitcher. And kind of his story is more about what could have been, obviously, both for the team and for the player. But he was on a Hall of Fame trajectory, and he was beloved by his peers. And I also want Hanley Ramirez. Hanley Ramirez, kind of like Beltran, would have different types of cards. When he was young, he was like wiry and fast, but also powerful because he was athletic. That'd be cool as a shortstop. Later on, when he became kind of fat, if we're being honest, he was a power-hitting killer of baseballs. So he'd be cool. And lastly, just because it's funny, where's Dan Uggla? Dan Uggla can't be expensive, Ramon. Ramon, you cannot be out here telling me Dan Uggla costs a lot of money. So let's go get Danny Uggs, one of the worst fielding second basemen I've ever witnessed with my eyeballs, but a slugger. He kind of reminds me of a worse Brian Dozier. Brian Dozier's in the game. Go get Dan Uggla. Let's talk about the Milwaukee Brewers. There are people in my comments, and I'm not saying they're wrong, but there are people in the comments adamant that MLB The Show or SDS hates the Brewers. I don't know if that's true. But the Brewers could use some love. So let's start with Ben Sheets. Ben Sheets' career was derailed by injuries. What could have been? But at his peak, man, he was really good. And he was a big-time strikeout guy. So let's go with Ben Sheets. I'd also love Carlos Gomez. I stayed away from the older Brewers. I just went with the recent era because I think even though they haven't always been phenomenal, the recent era of Brewers history is kind of fun. So Carlos Gomez and then tying him to Ricky Weeks. Two just like electric players. I just want fun players. And I think they're both they're not the same, obviously, but like they're similar enough where I could be like, oh, it makes sense. So I'd love both of them. And that would be just a treat. Just a beautiful treat to have them both in the game. Let's move to the Twins. Michael Kadire. Who knows who Michael Kadire is? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Michael Kadire was a Twins legend. Also played for the Mets and had a pretty good tenure with the Mets, if I do recall. Jim Cott. Jim Cott pitched forever. Jim Cott also has 12 gold gloves with the Twins. Pitcher gold gloves, whatever. But Jim Cott would not be bad. So let's go get Jim Cott. And lastly, this name you might have to look up. He was a 17th round draft pick. He played from 1981 to 1994. Kent Herbeck, I believe is how you say his name. His number's retired by the Twins. Just a big-time power hitter. A draft success story. Why not? Why not Kent? Let's move on to the Mets, and these are three pretty obvious ones. Bartolo Flibbin Colon. Why? Because who doesn't love Bartolo Colon? And he plays on so many teams. I also kind of want to see his player model in the game. I want to see his player model really, really badly. I'd also love to see Darryl Strawberry. So Darryl Strawberry obviously has a little bit of a different background. A lot of drug use issues. I know for a while maybe he was kind of out of the limelight, but the Mets clearly have reconciled with him. They retired his number. I would hope that the rest of baseball could do the same. Wow, what a bad offensive inning by me. And then David Cone, man. How cool would David Cone be? He threw every pitch in the book. He was crafty. Played on a lot of teams as well. When you talk about adding legends that fulfill that, he certainly does. He's also an analyst now, and in my opinion, one of the best ones out there. He's a really good analyst. He's the only way I can listen to Sunday Night Baseball with Carl Ravitch and Eduardo Perez, because they're two absolute bumbling idiots. But David Cone is great. David Cone is a one-of-one color guy who just knows how to analyze pitching. He's phenomenal. So David Cone, I mean, that wouldn't get him in the game, but just as a sidebar, I love David Cone. The Yankees. Okay, so you guys know I'm a dirty, disgusting Yankee fan. You're well aware. I'm well aware. I'm self-aware. The Yankees have every freaking legend in the book. The Yankees have more legends, I would gather, than anybody else. I haven't actually done the count, but I'm assuming that's correct. But there's 3 more that I would humbly ask for. Hideki Matsui. I think we all got bamboozled during the Derek Jeter storyline. I thought we were getting Hideki Matsui. Instead, it was CC, and I'm not complaining about CC either, but I thought we were getting Matsui. I also love A-Rod. A-Rod also has a little bit of a history. Mostly just steroids, though, and him kind of being an asshat on occasion. But I think we could deal with asshattery. I've said this so many times. 3 different teams. He'd have 3 different, card builds. And it just seems too obvious to me. He seems like the type of guy you put on a cover and you sell copies. And then lastly, I went with Yogi Berra. Another catcher. Beloved. I can't hit this game. The most World Series by an individual ever. I still think he holds that record. Did he have 8, 10? He had a lot. Bring us Yogi. Bring us Yogi. He was also a funny fella. If you come to a fork in the road, take it. What does that even mean, Yogi? What does that mean? That's one of my favorite Yogiisms. Baseball's 90% physical and the other half is mental, I think is the quote. That's another funny one. But Yogi Berra. We move on to the Oakland A's. We're kind of on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, gotta be 11 left. This took longer than I thought. That's okay. Also, I know this might not be everybody's cup of tea, this type of video, this type of podcast, because I can kind of just listing names and playing meaningless conquest games in the background, but I thought this was a good conversation to have because there's so many names out there that are available. The Oakland Athletics. Jimmy Fox, we just lost him. Bring him back. Everybody loves Jimmy Fox. Everybody loves Jimbo Fox, and because the relationship is already there, I would hope it's not that hard to get him back. Also, Eric Chavez. One of the best early 2000s third basemen in baseball. A staple of the Oakland Athletics franchise. I would love to have Eric Chavez. Such a sweet lefty swing. And then Dave Stewart. So Dave Stewart is a member of the Black Aces. Dave Stewart pitched on a lot of teams, but I think he had his best stretch with Oakland. He had 4 straight seasons of 20-plus wins. Do it. Just give them to me. Pitching depth is always appreciated. Moving on to the Phillies. Struck out Luis Ariz. That's fun. Steve Carlton. He's one of the best lefty starters in the history of baseball. I don't think we need to argue for much more than that. Just go get Steve Carlton. He also pitched, I think it was on the Reds or the Cardinals? He pitched on another red-colored team. Oh my God, we got a hit. Oh my God, we did it. Also, Bobby Abreu. I don't know why, but the idea of playing with Bobby Abreu really excites me. He'd have to have just an incredible swing. You know, he wasn't super fast. He wasn't a great fielder, but he had a good arm. I remember when he was a Yankee, he was petrified of colliding with the right field wall, so any ball hit over his head was an absolute adventure. But either way, Bobby Abreu would be cool. He also had one of the most legendary, home run derby runs of all time. I believe it was in Comerica. So it was a while ago. But if you talk about flashback home run derby cards, because SDS likes those, he'd fit that build as well. And then lastly, I want Scott Rowland, recent Hall of Famer. He kind of follows the Adrian Beltre build of recent Hall of Fame third baseman, of course. I'm kind of surprised he wasn't in the game right after his induction, like Beltre was, but there's still time, Ramon. Go get Scott Rowland. Played for a bunch of teams, too. And it's fun to have that caliber defensive third baseman. So let's talk about the Pirates. And my Pirates friends are going to be not upset. That's not the right word, but like I looked at the Pirates like best players of all time. I literally did a Google search of every team's best player of all time. And the Pirates are kind of like, at least in terms of ones we don't have in the game. So I started with a random one. Craig Wilson. Why did I start with Craig Wilson? I think about how the game works. One of the most valuable quirks in MLB The Show is the pinch hitter quirk. Why? Because you want to make sure you... Wow, I didn't score in the 3 innings of this game. Why? Because you want your pinch hitter to do damage. Craig Wilson, in 2001, tied a Major League Baseball record with 7 pinch hit homers in a season. That, to me, sounds pretty neat. There's no shot he costs a lot of money. With no disrespect to Craig Wilson, so go get him. Next up, Tony Watson. Had a good peak, and adding a lefty reliever would be fun. Now, Tony Watson's not getting a 99, I'm sure. Not every legend needs to have 99s. That's another thing I should have said up top. We don't need legends who are only worth 99s. I just need legends who had good seasons and good peaks. So Tony Watson would fit that build. And the last one is Brian Giles. Brian Giles had some really good seasons with the Pirates, and the Padres, I think, was the other team that he kind of starred for. But from 2000 to 2003, this guy had an OPS plus of 157. Do you know how good that is? That is nutty. Pirates fans, who am I missing? I'm sure there are some old-timey pitchers. Not old-timey, but older school pitchers. Jack Wilson and Jason Kendall came to mind, but we did just have Jason Kendall. And I never saw really anybody using him other than for a Pirates-themed team. So Pirates fans, who am I missing? Let me know. We're on to the San Diego Fathers, the Padres, who I'm playing right now. Dave Winfield, just an incredible power hitter. Just a big, strong man. Played for a bunch of teams. Kind of, I mean, a lesser version, but similar body type to Aaron Judge, if we're being honest. I think it'd be super fun to use... let me rephrase that, or start over, because I brain farted. I think a silver version of Dave Winfield in BR would be so cool. Just thinking about, like, all the different ways you could use these cards. Obviously, he'd get diamonds and 90s and stuff like that. But, like, think about all the different ways MLB The Show uses their legends. And there's still potential for more. But using a silver or gold Winfield in BR would be a blast. I'd love that. Oh, my God, we scored a run. So, Dave Winfield, the first Padre. The second Padre, Jake Peavy, who was here and gone in a season. Wow, what a throw. Jake, where'd you go? I miss you so. It's like it's been forever since you've been gone. So come back home. That's a song. One of the best pitchers of the 2000s. Jake, where'd you go? You're an MLB Network guy. How come we lost your rights so quickly? It makes me sad. Lastly, for the Padres, Randy Jones. Who is that? You're going to have to look him up. He won the 1976 Cy Young Award. 25 complete games and 22 victories. He also, the year before, I believe, led the National League in ERA, but came in second in the Cy Young voting. Random guy, yes, but it adds to the lore of the franchise, and that's important. Next up is the San Francisco Gigantes. Buster Posey. I know Buster Posey, when he was in the game, maybe was not a super fan favorite because his swing was not great, but we've seen them tinker with swings lately, and I'm not concerned about that moving forward. Buster Posey would be great. As would, here's a weird one. Not a weird one. I mean, Mel Ott is one of the best baseball players of all time. He has over 110 career WAR. He's in the Hall of Fame. It's a weird one because he was like a feared slugger during his day, but he was 5'9", 170 pounds. He was me. That's me. I am 5'9", 170. And he hit like 500 or something career homers. Isn't that absurd? I'm terrible. I can't hit for any power. So, Mel Ott. And then the last one, thinking about interesting relievers, maybe some names people don't immediately think of. This is a Hall of Famer, Hoyt Wilhelm. So Hoyt Wilhelm, other than having an interesting name, he was a reliever who pitched insane innings totals and insane numbers of games per season. So I implore you to look up Hoyt Wilhelm and look at the ridiculous Baseball Reference page he put up, especially early in his career. He played for a couple of teams or a bunch of teams as well, so he'd fit theme teams. He'd be a multi-inning reliever, and I think that's kind of neat because we don't really have a lot of builds that kind of encourage that usage of relievers. So that's why I went there. The Seattle Mariners, Ichiro. We need Ichiro, but we also need the hitting engine to let Ichiro shine. We need Tony Gwynn to shine. We need all these contact guys to shine, specifically Ichiro. So that'd be a big one for me. As would Felix Hernandez. We had him. We lost him. I think it was in MLB The Show 21 that he was just a king. King Felix. Correct me if I'm wrong, though. It might have been 20. I always get my years mixed up. Once you get old, all the years kind of start blending together. So I'd like Felix Hernandez, and I'd also like bring him back, too. This is kind of a repetitive one for the Mariners. Mariners fans, I'm sorry there wasn't more uniqueness here. John Olerud, bring back the helmet on defense, man. What a king John Olerud was. We're going a fourth inning with Paul Skeens. This might be kind of risky in Conquest. Let's see. The Cardinals. A few more repeats here. Rogers Hornsby. We all miss Rogers Hornsby dearly. If you did not play MLB The Show in like 1920, 21, maybe just 1920, Rogers Hornsby was one of the best, probably the best and most popular power hitting second baseman in the game. This dude was on everybody's team. He was crazy good, just bare knuckling the baseball bat, no batting gloves. He was incredibly fun to use. We also would all love Albert Pujols back, and I have a suspicion he'll be back sooner than we think. I almost hope he's back next year. I think MLB The Show knows that this year's Legend Pool was not exactly incredible. So I'm hoping that means they go get a couple big guys next year. Albert Pujols, of course, would be that. Lastly, another catcher, because it's good to have catchers. Switch hitting catcher, Ted Simmons. He was a Silver Slugger with 6 career All-Star Game appearances. Good enough for me. Welcome to the team. I also believe Ted Simmons is a Hall of Famer. If not, he's a close Hall of Famer. I think his number's retired by the Cardinals. I lost that part in my research. I didn't do all that research, but very good player. Tampa Bay. We all know Tampa Bay's got virtually no history, and we already have Wade Boggs. Fred McGriff would have been an option, but I don't know of anybody using Fred McGriff when he was in the game. So we're going B.J. Upton. Fun, athletic, had a couple cool, fun years. I don't know if he'd be a 99, but he was great. So B.J. Upton. James Shields. I think he'd be fun. A sinker, cutter guy. He'd have all the meta pitches. A funky little delivery. And then Carl Crawford, who, at his peak, was one of the most exciting players in the game of baseball, right? I mean, oh, did we finish the map? Yay. One of the most exciting players in the game of baseball. The Texas Rangers. Hold on, before we do that. YouTube, we're going to open these 2 packs and see if we get rare rounds. Hold on. Rare. Never mind. I've never been more upset at something in my life. And then here we go, Vault Pack. Shohei Ohtani. We got crap. Never mind. We're going to leave it on this screen. For the Rangers, Juan Gonzalez, who was an elite run producer. Mark Teixeira, a switch-hitting first baseman who would be used by a ton of people. And Julio Franco, strictly to make Dibu happy. Because Dibu's been barking up that tree forever. 2 more teams. The Toronto Blue Jays. Jose Bautista. Duh. Not even going to say more on that. Vernon Wells. He's kind of from a not great era of Blue Jays baseball. But Vernon Wells, like, for a while was the face of the Blue Jays. When you think about it, that's kind of crazy, but he kind of was. And then Dave Stieb, I think is how you say his name. He's the best pitcher in Blue Jays history. Dave Stieb, righty. Look him up. Last team, Washington Nationals / the Expos. Ryan Zimmerman. I think we're long enough removed from Ryan Zimmerman that it's time to go get him back. Lefty killer off the bench. I miss the days of bringing Ryan Zimmerman in as a pinch hitter. Marquise Grissom, a different one, a weird one, a speedy outfielder who could play the outfield. Again, it has a lot to do with the game engine changing, but I'd love that. And then I really wasn't sure for the last one here. Javier Vasquez came to mind because he was an Expo. He doesn't do it for me. I wanted to pick a pitcher. So I picked Jordan Zimmerman because at the least he threw a no-hitter with the Nationals, if I remember correctly. Once he left the Nationals, his career spiraled out of control. It was terrible. Injuries sucked for the Tigers. But Jordan Zimmerman had a really high peak, and he'd be cool. So, internet, both podcast and YouTube, that was 90 names in about 40 minutes of who MLB The Show could go get. They're available. they're out there. I hope I didn't butcher any of this information, and I hope I didn't miss any of your very obvious favorite guys. But of course, if I did miss anybody, or if you have different opinions, specifically for some of those teams maybe that don't have a long history, put them in the comments. This is going to be a fun video to have a conversation about, so I look forward to reading everything. But thank you all for making it to the end. I love you all. I'll see you next time.